So good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, I'm Jimmy. Thanks for the introduction, Kate. Let's click. So who am I? I'm the CEO and founder of Ceeyu. Ceeyu is a company that helps in attack surface management and third-party risk management. So we basically build a platform around it to make it more easy to manage and to view risks coming out of either your digital footprint from the attack surface management point and from third-party risk management. Prior to Ceeyu, I was a security consultant working in mainly the financial and pharmaceutical sector, where I helped my customers on building a governance and operational teams concerning vulnerability, threat, incident, and obviously third-party risk management. Basically, what I'll be telling today is mostly coming out of my background, out of my past experiences, what we build into the platform to make sure that the third-party risk management can be run smoothly and as best as we can. And that will then decrease the risk coming out of your third parties. So before we continue, can I have a raise of hands who here is involved in third-party risk management at their organization? Quite a bit of people. And of you, do you believe that it runs well, that you get the most value out of it, or do you still see some hiccups and points of improvement? So if it runs well, just a show of hands. No? Okay, then you're in the right session, I guess. So obviously, knowing third-party risk is important. You wouldn't be sitting in this room otherwise. I'm not going to go through everything, but those are some hand-picked items that go wrong when working with third parties, and we can be susceptible to data breaches. Most important and one of the most recent ones on this one is the MOVEit, the IBM MOVEit cyber attack. Basically, IBM provided a platform to share information. Obviously, lots of customers are using that. They got hacked, unfortunately, and that impacted their customers using that. So that's a typical example of a third-party breach or risk within third party. So I have a couple of interesting names, BBC, British Airways, etc. They have all been impacted recently by this third-party hack. So I'm going to walk you through a, let's say, generic third-party risk management process. I'm going to highlight each and every different step. Obviously, your program can differentiate a little bit from the generic one that I put here. But we'll look at governance, selecting third parties that have to take part in your third-party risk management program or TPRM program. So I'm going to abbreviate it from now on. Developing an assessment. How are we going to tackling those third parties? How can we assess the risk? Executing the risk and then analyzing the risk. And obviously, in a process, we always go back and forth with to-dos and with mitigations and remediations and fine-tuning. So first off is the governance. Everything starts with a governance. We need some documentation that discovers or that tells us why are we doing this? How will we do that? When will we do that? And who will be involved in that? So there's a governance part of your process. I highlight a couple of things that are quite important when we talk about TPRM. First of all, there's the need. We need to define the need. Why do we need a TPRM program in our organization? Is it because of compliance, regulatory, internal compliance, internal regulations, for example, external ones? They all will define criteria that we need to create a TPRM program, to determine what are we going to ask, to who will we ask that question, and what will be the value of that question coming out of it. Next, there's the risk appetite. Really important to have a risk appetite defined in a TPRM program. We need to know when to stop asking questions. When have we reached the threshold that we stop asking questions to our suppliers, to our third parties? Or when haven't we asked enough questions? When do we have to ask more questions to extract the risk or to have a good evaluation of the risk that that third party introduces in our organization? And we translate that obviously in a governance structure, mainly policies, standards, processes, procedures, etc., that we then have validated by senior management or the board, depending on your type of organization. From there, we go, and I'll highlight that in a different slide, to the inventorization of suppliers and then executing the assessment. Now, some key issues that we often see arising here is not having a TPRM governance. You would be amazed at how many companies start third-party risk management without a proper TPRM governance structure in place. Not having a TPRM governance in place will put you at risk, so to say, at risk of not having a good execution. You won't have that senior management backing, which you will need probably to convince internal business owners or suppliers for that part. You won't know when to stop asking questions. So you might overdo your TPRM, you will lose interest of your supplier. If you didn't define the need properly, it will be difficult to internally explain why it is necessary to do that. Because we receive a lot of friction from suppliers in executing a TPRM, but often we also have lots of frictions internally in the organization of people who do have to execute it, do not want to execute it, because it's not clearly defined why the organization as such needs to do that. And then I highlighted it already, the risk appetite is not clearly defined. So basically, when do we stop delving into the questions, delving into getting the risk exposed of our supplier? Next step, so when we have that in place and we mind the key issues, let's start doing the inventorization of suppliers. And that's a tedious process. Right? We need to find out who are the suppliers, what is the criticality level of that supplier? Right? Is it someone that handles transactional data, confidential data? Well, obviously, that will be more critical than a supplier that delivers lunch. How do we define that? Well, we have to go back to our governance. We have to go back to why are we doing this? Why do we need to ask questions to our suppliers? And that will give us a list of suppliers. Right? If you want to know all of our suppliers, you will have a huge list. So break it down, match it with your governance. Your risk appetite is also very important in this one. You predefined your risk appetite, so you'll be able to match criticality levels of your suppliers to that risk appetite. When is a supplier a critical supplier? Maybe if they impact a certain business process that we need to maintain a compliance or regulation, for example. Maybe a supplier is critical because if something would happen with that supplier, we lose brand image or we lose revenue. It can be costly. An example I can give like that is Volvo. A couple of years ago, I'm from Belgium, by the way, we have a Volvo plant assembly lines in Belgium, and at one point in time they just stopped. The assembly line didn't produce any cars anymore. And there was nothing wrong at Volvo. Their systems were working, the assembly line was technically okay, there was no strike going on. We have a history of lots of strikes in Belgium, by the way, but that's all okay. The issue was, there was an issue with the supplier, and there was an issue with the supplier producing the seats for the cars. They had a ransomware attack. All their systems were locked, and they couldn't produce any seats, nor deliver any seats to Volvo. That means that Volvo had a huge impact. They had a brand impact, because everybody knows Volvo, but nobody knows the producer of the seats, by the way. And they had a revenue impact. They lost a couple of days to produce cars, which is a huge, huge, huge impact in that sector. Having a good governance structure in place and knowing why you're doing that, knowing what impacts our processes, will have highlighted the fact that that producer of car seats is a really important producer, because when they go out, the whole assembly line stops, the whole company stops moving. So that's a way of thinking about the criticality of your supplier. Be mindful not to highlight all suppliers as critical, because if you go out and you talk to business owners, the department heads, they ask them, can you produce me a list of your most critical suppliers? Every supplier will be critical. If you give them a framework where you say, this is a risk appetite, this is why we're doing that, now can you redo the exercise, then you will have a more granular list of critical and less critical suppliers. We always have everything, by the way, but it's up to you to delve through it. So another key issue here is, and actually bullets 2 and 3 are a bit the same, overestimating or underestimating the criticality, over-quantifying the impact of a vendor. Again, if you over-quantify the impact of a vendor, if all vendors are critical, for example, you will not stop asking questions. You will go deeper and deeper and deeper. And that puts a huge strain on your organization, on the people inside your organization, but also at their supplier side. And you will start losing their goodwill of helping you out in that process. Because we all know it, a supplier, his job is done when the contracts are signed and when they produce the service or the goods. Everything that comes on top of it, like a questionnaire, that's too much. And so we have to be mindful of that. And that leads me to the fourth bullet point. That's underestimating the resources you need to run that process. The more criticals you have, or medium suppliers you have, the bigger the questionnaires you will send out or the assessments you will perform, the more people you will need. So again, go back to your governance. If you have a governance structure in place, and keep it simple. Really go to those suppliers that are required to fill out a questionnaire. Obviously, there are means to gauge the risk level of the lesser critical suppliers, but you have to be mindful of the effort that's being put in by people involved in that process. So we have a governance structure in place. We have a list of our suppliers. We even managed to rate them from most critical to less critical or least critical. Then we're going to define an assessment criteria. How are we going to assess those suppliers? Third-party risk management, it's not new in cybersecurity and risk compliance. It exists for a couple of years already. Has been built on questionnaires. We have always built questionnaires in Excel. We send them out through email, and we hope for the best. That's still true today. Questionnaires allow you to get a good understanding of your supplier and the risk your supplier introduces to your organization. But the quality of the questionnaire needs to be on that level as well. Because if the quality of your questionnaire is not on that level, if you have just a generic questionnaire that you send to any and all suppliers out there, you will have generic answers as well, and that will lower the value. So lots of vendors, including Ceeyu, by the way, have been popping up the past couple of years. And they have tried and still trying and building things on top of those questionnaires. How can we lower the effort of a questionnaire? How can we raise the perception of risk of our suppliers? We can apply security ratings, where we scan a vendor on their outside infrastructure and then gauge a risk level on that, and then we can tell, look, your supplier has a certain security posture on their own outside infrastructure. That gives you a good idea how well they're managing their security. This is basically what we do with Ceeyu. You have vendors that basically scrape the web and the dark web, and they look for, let's say, dirt on our suppliers, and the more dirt they find, the more bad, let's say, that supplier will become, or the higher the risk they will introduce to your organization. And then obviously, we can look at certifications and compliance as well. Do my suppliers have an ISO certificate? Do they have a SOC 2 report? Do they have any other kind of certification that can help me, because they are validated by auditing firms, by third parties, that can validate to me they are doing something good with regards to risk management. Most of the times we see that companies will have a mix of questionnaires and some other form of gauging the risk over there. Now, there are a lot of issues with questionnaires as well. They can be too long. You can send a questionnaire based on the ISO framework, and we have that built in Ceeyu as well, with over 200 questions. But be very mindful to who you send it to, because it takes a lot of time for the organization to answer a questionnaire of 200 plus questions. It will lower the goodwill of your supplier, and the quality of the answers, the thought they will put in it will be lower, because they have that huge list to go through. It can also be too generic, or maybe too specific. If you're going too generic, you will lose the idea of where the risks lie. For example, you can ask, okay, do you take backups? And the supplier will go, yes, I take backups, because the laptop of the reception desk is backed up every day, 24/7. So yes, I take backups. A better question would be, do you take backups of the systems hosting my information or my data, for example? Then you will have a better answer that will allow you to basically highlight the risk and the issues with that. So the way you build your questionnaires will in fact determine the quality and the level of risk you can appoint to a certain supplier. And that you can mix with other types of assessment criteria, but the key issue here is not to only rely on those other types of assessments, like security ratings, and we do that as well. Security ratings are a great way to get to know how your vendor or your supplier does his own security. But it will not tell you about their internal network. It will not tell you how they will handle data, how their processes of accessing data and granting access to certain bits of information internally is done. So just going for security ratings or automated scans is quite nuanceable. As an example here, I can say, or I always ask a customer, okay, what do you believe the security rating of, for example, Microsoft would be? And you all say, oh, it's an A, it's an A+, it's really, really good because it's Microsoft, you know. Well, actually, if you do a security rating scan on Microsoft, and that's with any platform that provides that, you will have a very low rating. And why is that? They have just a massive amount of IP addresses on the internet. They cannot safeguard every asset they have exposed on the internet. But it doesn't mean that they will not handle your data confidentially, or they will not be able to get it back up and running if they have an attack going on. So we still need those questionnaires to properly fine-tune the amount of risk related to your supplier. Now, we did our governance. We built a list of suppliers. We defined the assessment criteria, preferably per type of supplier. And then we're going to execute our assessment. And here we often see that people think, okay, I'm going to send my security team or my GRC team is going to send that to my supplier's GRC team or security team, and we're done. But that's not true. You'll notice that once you send out that file, that Excel file or that questionnaire, whatever it is, it will start bouncing off in each and every department in that company. Maybe you didn't hit the right guy at first, so they will forward it, and then they will forward it as well. And then the supplier will ask questions, or the compliance team will ask questions. Why the hell are you sending me this? Do we have to comply? Is there any form of legal action if we refuse to comply? Everything will start bouncing off again. And then you will start bouncing off it internally to the business owner, to the department head, maybe even to senior management. It takes time to do this. You have to take into account that you need the time to properly gauge that process. And here I'm going to come back, and you hear me coming again. You need that governance part installed. You need to have some documentation that's backed by your senior management to tell you, we need this because of that why, that need that we need to fulfill. We need this because of that risk appetite we need to fulfill. And then you can go back to your internal teams and explain them exactly why it is necessary and why the fact that we send a questionnaire is not overdone. It's really necessary. And then we can go back to the supplier and they can understand the reasoning behind it. And that will give you that support that you so desperately need to get this completed and to get that data. So obviously, in this case, we also see a lot of unresponsive vendors. Might be that they were responsive at start, but somewhere down the line, they ghost you. They stopped responding. They really do not want to play ball anymore. You have to find the reason behind it. If you have your proper governance in place and they did understand why and why it's necessary, why are they ghosting you? Did you send just a massive amount of questions? Or are you delving deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper in a question on a question on a question? What's your risk appetite? When do you have to stop asking questions? It's really important that we do not lose the goodwill of our suppliers because they're not getting paid by you to fill it out. Well, if they have a massive contract, well, probably they put in some time and effort for that. But if you only have a low contract value with them, chances are you'll get ghosted quite quickly. Malicious compliance, that's also something we see quite often. Malicious compliance is where a vendor has a good score on the whole questionnaire. They just answer, yes, we do that. Yes, we have that. Obviously, we have business continuity within 24 hours. They just say yes to everything. That's, yeah, you cannot work with that. You cannot, you cannot get your risk out of it. You cannot make any decision based on malicious compliance. Trick here is just put in some questions where answering yes will give a negative feedback. If they just blindly answer yes on everything, they will hit yes on a question where a yes will actually subtract points instead of giving them points. And then you will get out malicious compliance. That will give you a reason to sit around the table with them and to explain them, okay, let's do this again. And then the last bullet point that suppliers referring to already filled out questionnaires. They already filled out an ISO-based questionnaire somewhere, and they provide you those answers as is. Or they have an ISO certification, so they provide you that certification with the question, can you please get out of your assessment if we provide you that SOC 2 report, that ISO questionnaire, or that ISO certification? Something you should consider, and something you should add to your risk appetite in your governance. Do we accept that or not? If you accept it, we get the confirmation that they are doing a good job because they have been audited by a third party and they have vouched that, okay, they do it properly. Or don't we accept it? And do we still require them to fill out a questionnaire? Yeah. Suppliers in this category are often bigger corporations. The Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles. They cannot respond to a questionnaire of each and every customer they have. So they build a portal or they build a list of certifications. So up to you to see what you do with that. But again, put it in your governance structure and make sure that you have a fitting answer for them. And then finally, once we have the filled out questionnaire or we have the data from different platforms, let's make an assessment and conclusions. And again, we see this bouncing going around. I'm not going to say people are afraid to make a conclusion, but we often see that conclusions on risk are often quite generic. There is no risk. While obviously there have been a couple of items that have been highlighted that should be rectified before doing business with them. Again, in case of Volvo, let's say that supplier didn't have EDR, hence they became victim to a ransomware attack. If you ask the question, do you have EDR in place, and they say no, I give them a good score. People are a bit afraid, and especially the people in the middle, the business owners, are afraid that a negative feedback on their supplier, which they work a lot with, will mean that they will stop working with them, or they will have to be forced to find another supplier. And often they do not want to be forced to find another supplier. But it doesn't have to. Again, go back to your governance structure. What will we do when a vendor, when a supplier has a bad rating, has a bad security level, has a bad risk? What are the actions we will be taking? Because often, bad or good, the process stops here. We did our due diligence, we have our answers. Regardless of the answers, we're not going to do anything. That's a shame. Why go through all the effort of doing this if you're not going to take any action on it? Even for the supplier, they put in a lot of man hours, but you do not give any feedback, so they do not know what to rectify. So again, make sure there's some process in place where you can provide the feedback to your supplier, where you can define next actions, where you can see, do we have to undertake action together with that supplier to improve their scores so we can continue doing business with them? And maybe down the line, if they really do not improve, sack them and change them by someone else? Or what are we going to do? And how are we going to translate that to the business owners who have a close working relationship with that? Key issues, I've been talking it in my narrative, but that going back to Ford and the low quality of information, but normally if you did the previous process quite well, we do not have low quality of information on this side. Subjective analysis is something that will basically remain. What is that? That's basically the interpretation of the results or the answers on a questionnaire. If I would do an interpretation of the results, I'm always doing an interpretation with my background, with my knowledge, with my expertise. And if one of you would do that, well, obviously you have your own background, you have your own expertise, and you might interpret the questions or the answers a bit differently. It helps to have a framework discussed in the team, GRC team, security team, to go about and how do we interpret certain results. And if you're not sure, well, just have a peer review, and let's see how we can interpret results. So some key takeaways from all of this. When we look at TPRM governance, one, make sure you have it. That's maybe the main key takeaway. But make it realistic, make it doable. Keep it simple, make it understandable by everyone involved in that, all the shareholders or the stakeholders involved in that, and make sure it's backed by your senior management. If you have a business owner that really does not want to play ball and he goes to senior management, that senior management is not going like, TPRM what? I do not know about that. Regarding selection of your third parties and criteria, you really have to find a way of knowing the key suppliers. If that key supplier would have an impact, what is the impact on our organization? And then, obviously, again, we need the business owners backing on that as well. With regards to assessment definition, my advice would be use compact but relevant questionnaires. Do not send 200 questions. It's of no use. Just send somewhere between 20 to 40 questions, pertinent questions. Based on the answers, you can always go a bit deeper. To give you an example, one of our customers, maybe they're quite extreme, but one of our customers, they built a questionnaire with just 10 questions. And based on the outcome of those 10 questions, they will either have a meeting with that supplier to go a bit deeper into the reasoning behind it, or they will just accept the questionnaire as is and move on. And next year, they will do the same questionnaire and the same assessment again. And if after 3 years, you have always had a good rating, then they will have a meeting anyways with that supplier and go a bit deeper on certain aspects just to see if things haven't changed. But that lowers the effort on your internal team, and that lowers the effort at the teams of your suppliers. And that raises, again, the goodwill of them to respond to your assessment. Assessment execution, be very clear on what you expect from your suppliers. I have seen too many times people sending questionnaires to their suppliers without any words, without any reasoning behind it, without any explanation behind it. Yeah, well, sometimes I ask myself, what do they expect? Give them a call, give them a heads up, give them a mail. Just explain them, look, you're going to get a questionnaire from us. It's going to take a bit of your time, but it's required, it's needed because of those and those reasons, and that we can do it properly. Analyzing the assessment, again, use predefined objective criteria. Have those criteria accepted by your peers, by the business owner, so you can have a proper and objective risk quantification on your questionnaire or on your assessment. I already highlighted Ceeyu, so we are a company that provides a platform that will help you to maximize the outcome of TPRM process and hopefully minimize the input you have to put into it from your side and also from your supplier's side. That is from my side. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.